السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد، اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وعملا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. My dear brothers and sisters, we begin by praising and thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Him to send His salat and salam upon the final messenger Muhammad ibn Abdullah, salawatu rabbi wa salamuhu alayhi. My dear brothers and sisters, this is our second part in our series regarding the four Imams. Last week we gave an introduction to the four Imams and the Madahib. Tonight inshallah we'll be speaking about the first of the four Imams, Al-Imam Abu Hanifah rahimahullah. And he is known as the senior Imam. And I want to start off with a statement of one of the people of the past, Abdullah ibn Dawood al-Khuraybi rahimahullah. He says, يجب على أهل الإسلام أن يدعو الله لأبي حنيفة في صلاتهم لحفظه عليهم السنن والفقه. Abdullah ibn Dawood al-Khuraybi rahimahullah, he said, it is every Muslim's duty to make dua to Allah for Abu Hanifah rahimahullah because of how well he preserved for us the sunnah and the law, Islamic rulings and the sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam. All of the Muslims are indebted to Al-Imam Abu Hanifah rahimahullah ta'ala. So this is something that I wanted to start off with, for us to first and foremost recognize that he is known as the senior Imam and that all of the Muslims are indebted to him rahimahullah for the way he preserved the sunnah and the religion as a whole. What do you guys know about Imam Abu Hanifah before we speak a little bit about him? Nobody knows anything about Abu Hanifah? An-Nu'man ibn Thabit. Okay, nice. So that's his actual name. Okay. So some of the scholars say that maybe he was from from Kabul, maybe potentially. I mean, the historians differ in terms of where he was born exactly. In Syria? Did I say Syria? Iraq. Okay. Because remember, the way that the countries are designated right now, so it wasn't the same at the time of Imam Abu Hanifah. Anything else other than where he was born? No? Okay. Name and lineage. Let's start off with the most basic points. Imam Abu Hanifah rahimahullah, this wasn't his actual name. Abu Hanifah was his kunya, and this is something that the Arabs have, where they will refer to an individual by the father of their eldest son normally, or eldest child, as a form of respect and honoring. So Imam Abu Hanifah, this is his kunya. His actual name was, as Sheikh mentioned, An-Nu'man ibn Thabit ibn Zuta. An-Nu'man ibn Thabit, Nu'man the son of Thabit, the son of Zuta, rahimahullah ta'ala. And he was from Persian descent. He was of Persian descent. He was originally, meaning his ancestry is of Persian descent. His grandson, he explains the following. He says, my grandfather, meaning Abu Hanifah, he was born in the year 86 after Hijrah. So almost, 86 after Hijrah. And then Thabit, who is Thabit? His father. So Thabit went to see the companion Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu anhu. With whom? With An-Nu'man, with Imam Abu Hanifah rahimahullah. And An-Nu'man was a small child at that time. Meaning Abu Hanifah rahimahullah was a small child at the time. So the companion, the cousin of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Ali ibn Abi Talib, he prayed that Allah bless his children, bless Thabit and his children. And his grandson says, we hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responded to the dua of the companion Ali ibn Abi Talib. So we can already see there is a close connection with the tabaqa of the companions radiallahu anhum. Imam Abu Hanifah, he has a connection with the tabaqa of the companions. First and foremost, by the fact that Ali ibn Abi Talib, he actually made dua for him. And also it's mentioned that Imam Abu Hanifah, he also met a number of the companions. From most prominent, they mentioned that he met Anas ibn Malik radiallahu anhu. Did Abu Hanifah rahimahullah ta'ala narrate, transmit narrations from the companions? There's a dispute. Some scholars argue that he did, some argue that he didn't. But we know for sure that he at least met the companions specifically Anas ibn Malik rahimahullah ta'ala. Why is that so significant? And why are we mentioning this point right now? What's so significant about him meeting the companions radiallahu anhum? So he will be considered from the tabi'een, my dear brothers and sisters. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, خَيْرُ الْقُرُونِ قَرْنِي ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُمْ ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُم. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that the best of nations is qarni, my nation, meaning the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُم. Then those who come after the companions, meaning their students, the tabi'een, and Abu Hanifah rahmatullah will be considered from the tabi'een. ثُمَّ الَّذِينَ يَلُونَهُم. And those who come after them, meaning the students of the successors of the companions. So he falls into the dua of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and this testimony of the Messenger alayhi salatu wasalam, that he is considered to be from the best of nations. None of us here have that particular status that Abu Hanifah rahimahullah ta'ala, and he actually has this unlike many of the other ai*imma of the religion. So he can be considered to be from the tabi'een. So Nu'man ibn Thabit, Abu Hanifah rahimahullah, Ali ibn Talib made dua for him. He met Anas ibn Malik. Initially, Imam Abu Hanifah rahimahullah, was he considered to be a student of knowledge? Initially, Abu Hanifah rahimahullah was not engaged in seeking knowledge. Initially, in his early youth and adulthood, he was engaged in what? In business. So he would go to the marketplace in Kufa. So this is where he was based. He was based in Kufa in Iraq. So he would go to the marketplace and he would engage in business, trade, transaction. And this is how he spent his time. So one day he was passing by one of the great people of the past, scholars of the past, by the name of Imam al-Sha'bi rahimahullah. Amir ibn Sharahil al-Sha'bi rahimahullah. So Imam al-Sha'bi sees Imam Abu Hanifa. Remember, he's not an Imam at this time. He sees him and he's on his way to the market. He says, where are you going? He goes, I'm going to the marketplace. He goes, no, I'm not talking about the marketplace. I'm talking about who from amongst the scholars do you sit with and do you study with? Because I don't really sit with the scholars. I don't really seek knowledge. So Imam al-Sha'bi rahimahullah ta'ala, he mentioned the following advice. He says, لا تغفل وعليك بالنظر في العلم ومجالسة العلماء فإني أرى فيك يقظة وحركة. Imam al-Sha'bi says to Abu Hanifa as he's on his way to market, he says, do not be neglectful. You must dedicate your energies to studying with the scholars, because I see in you, I see that you're very alert and you're active. Meaning he sees potential in Abu Hanifa rahimahullah. He says, don't neglect the scholars. So Abu Hanifa rahimahullah said that particular statement of Imam al-Sha'bi was transformative. Meaning I benefited from that statement. I gave up business, meaning he didn't give up business totally, but he ensured that now he would go and spend time seeking knowledge with the scholars. So this was the powerful advice of Imam al-Sha'bi rahimahullah ta'ala, and this is how Imam Abu Hanifa's journey began. What benefit or point of benefit can you take from this? There are other instances like this, by the way. You know the Sahih al-Bukhari, the compilation of hadith by Imam al-Bukhari. Does anyone know how he came up with the idea to actually compile a collection of hadith like this? What was it that motivated Imam al-Bukhari to compile Sahih al-Bukhari? He was sitting in a lesson with his classmates, his teacher at the time. He said, if only one of you guys compiled a book of hadith that are authentic. That's what he said. It would be something really good. It would be a good contribution to Islamic knowledge. If one of you people in the class right now were to compile the authentic narrations of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That one statement penetrated the heart of Imam al-Bukhari, and this was the catalyst, if you like, for him to now to go on and compile Sahih al-Bukhari. This is a simple statement from Imam al-Sha'bi, and he motivated Imam al-Bukhari, Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, to begin his journey in seeking knowledge, and eventually he became one of the great Imams of the Muslims. So again, the question is, what benefit can you take from this? Besides the fact that this was the beginning of Imam Abu Hanifa's journey. Come on, there must be somebody who can extrapolate something from this. Hadith? Not hadith? Getting knowledge of deen, of course, is extremely important. Also, never to underestimate a good word that you may say to somebody. Imam al-Sha'bi rahmatullah, he didn't give him a lecture, he just said this one word, this one statement. And that was the spark for him to go on to become one of the great Imams of the Muslims. All of the reward, all of the benefit that Imam Abu Hanifah rahmatullah came about with later on, who's going to get a part of that? Not part, but who's going to get a reward for that? Imam al-Sha'bi. Imam al-Sha'bi is going to get the reward of the efforts of Imam Abu Hanifah rahmatullah because of this one statement. So never belittle a good word that you may share with somebody, because you never know how far it may reach. So he begins seeking knowledge. What was special about Kufa, where he was based? Imam Abu Hanifah rahmatullah mentions, you go? Okay, so not initially, but that came about later on. He was based in Kufa, and he mentioned that Kufa was a gold mine of knowledge. You know, there's loads of scholars that were present in Kufa at the time. Just like if you go to Medina right now, it's full of scholars in the masjid, outside of the masjid. So Kufa was a place where it was a gold mine of knowledge, of ulama. So Imam Abu Hanifah rahimahullah, he says, I attended the lectures of the scholars there in Kufa, and I dedicated study under one of his legal experts. He studied with various scholars, but there's one particular individual that Imam Abu Hanifah rahimahullah, he really done mulazama of. He really ensured that he spent most of his studies and prioritized his lessons. Who was this legal expert? This is his main teacher, by the way. Anyone know? Somebody said it. Oh, it's there. Hammad ibn Abi Sulaiman, rahimahullah ta'ala. Hammad ibn Abi Sulaiman, one of the great legal experts of Kufa, and he was the main teacher of Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah. To the extent that when Abu Hanifa, rahimahullah ta'ala, began attending the lessons of Hammad, Hammad noticed that this young man had a lot of potential. That he wasn't an ordinary student. You can tell that this person stood out from the rest of the class. So he would say, no one but Abu Hanifa may sit at the head of the class right in front of me. When he honored Abu Hanifa rahmatullahi ta'ala, because he saw the potential in him, only he was allowed to sit in front of him, so that he can benefit from him the most. Do you know how long he spent with Hammad studying fiqh and the Quran and the Sunnah? How many years? 6 years? He spent a total of 18 years with Hammad ibn Abu Sulaiman. 18 years he studied with Hammad ibn Abu Sulaiman. And it's something to think about. When people go abroad or people study, they might study a few years, even if you say 10 years, and then they become a big sheikh. Imam Abu Hanifah rahmatullah mentioned that I studied with Hammad for 10 years. So a decade had passed, and he was sitting in the classes of Hammad. And then he admits himself, I felt that now I've become qualified to set up my own circle in the masjid. I no longer need to sit with Hammad. I can actually teach my own class. This is after a decade. So he's already spent a significant amount of time. So he goes and sits, and he opens up his own circle. Hammad, he sees this. So he wants to put Imam Abu Hanifa in his place. So he says to some of the students, go to Abu Hanifa, go to that class, and ask him a number of questions. If he gives you this answer, say that's the incorrect answer. And if he gives you an opposing answer, say that's also the incorrect answer. Meaning whatever answer he gives you, just tell him it's incorrect. So they go to him, they ask him the question, they pose the questions to him, he gives them an answer, he goes, that's incorrect. He goes, okay, maybe it's this one then. He goes, that's incorrect as well. And then he realizes that his teacher Hammad is teaching him a lesson, that it's not your time yet. It's not your time to now go and start your own circle. You need to come back and sit in the circle of knowledge until you become qualified. So this is an important point, my dear brothers and sisters, the importance of ensuring that a person doesn't jump the gun. What's that, say it again? No, it's not connected in Zoom today. I think there's some sisters on the other side as well. So Zoom's not on today, but I think it might be live streamed somewhere. So the importance of not rushing, ensuring that you have your foundation solid before you begin teaching knowledge. Like Imam Abu Hanifah rahmatullah, he spent 18 years before he went and became the head of that particular circle. And because of the impact that Hammad ibn Abi Sulaiman had on Abu Hanifa rahmatullah, he would say that ever since Hammad passed away, I ensure that I mention him in every single dua that I make for him. Every dua that I make, I ensure that I make dua for his teacher, Hammad ibn Abi Sulaiman. So this is an important point to remember, my dear brothers. This is the importance of having a main teacher, a mentor figure. So Hammad rahmatullah, do you think he was just teaching knowledge for 18 years, like information? Or was it just purely information that he was disseminating to Abu Hanifa over those 18 years? It wasn't just knowledge. Abu Hanifa was benefiting from the way Hammad would carry himself, the way he would interact with others, from his akhlaq, his khuluq, from his ibadah. And this is something that when people study online or study from books, you don't get. Because there's a human element that a person misses out on when they're only seeking knowledge from books and listening to audios and watching YouTube videos and so on and so forth. Obviously, it's an alternative for people who don't have access to scholars or teachers directly, but there's a human element that's missing that people don't actually benefit from, and it's as important. And this is the way it used to be in the past. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah will speak about him. When he would teach a class, how many people would attend his lesson? 5,000 people would attend his lesson. Only 500 would be writing notes. What were the rest of the 4,500 people doing? They were obviously learning from the knowledge, whatever they could retain, but more importantly, they were learning from the akhlaq and the character of Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala. And that's something also a person shouldn't neglect. If you have the ability and opportunity to sit with a scholar or a teacher or somebody who has wisdom and somebody who has good character, and definitely for you to spend time with them, because it rubs off on a person. So he studies with Imam Hammad ibn Abi Sulaiman for 18 years, and there's other scholars that he studies with as well. In terms of appearance and demeanor, they're describing him as being handsome, well-dressed, of medium height, tidy appearance. He would wear pleasant fragrance. He was well-spoken, meaning he wouldn't like drone on. He would be very precise in his speech. He would have a melodious voice. He had a melodious voice, and he's unpretentious in the way that he would converse with others. I mean, he wouldn't use flowery language and rhetoric. I mean, he was straight to the point, but very short, succinct, and comprehensive at the same time. Yahya al-Qattan rahimahullah, he says about Abu Hanifa, he said, جالسنا والله أبا حنيفة وسمعنا منه وكنت والله إذا نظرت إليه عرفت في وجهه أنه يتقي الله عز وجل. He said, we sat in the lessons and listened to Abu Hanifa rahmatullah. We sat in circles, we studied with him, we learned from him. I swear by Allah, if you looked at his face, you knew that he was a person who feared Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there's people like this, my dear brothers and sisters, that you come across. That just by the appearance, you might feel your iman increasing. Some people, they would travel from the Salaf, they would travel to particular individuals just to look at them. Because by looking at them, they found that their iman would increase. And that's because of the barakah of iman that appears on a person's limbs. So this was the way of Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah as well. Meaning the way he would appear, that would also be a way that it would impact the people around him. Not only was Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah one of the great legal experts of the Muslims, but he was also an abid, a worshipper of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is another common theme that you find that runs through all of the Imam of the deen. They weren't people who just amassed information, but they're also people who devoted themselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sufyan ibn Uyayna, he said that nobody came to Mecca who was more devoted in prayer than Abu Hanifa. Sufyan ibn Uyayna was based in Mecca. He goes, nobody came and visited Mecca who was more devoted in his salah. There was nobody who would perform more prayers when they would come to Mecca than Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala. He was referred to as the tent pole. This was a attribute or characteristic that he was attributed with because of his long standing in prayer. Long standing in prayer. Allah Jalla wa Ala, he says, وَقُومُوا لِلَّهِ قَانِتِينَ. And you find that this was the way of the Salaf. And at the head of them, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. People speak about him only performing 11 raka'at, right? Or 8 raka'at of tarawih. But the length that he would spend standing in those 8 raka'at were hours. It wasn't 30 minutes or 20 minutes. People do a quick prayer and then they leave. If you want to follow the way of the Prophet ﷺ, think about the length of his prayer as well, not just the number of raka'at. So Imam Abu Hanifah rahmatullahi ta'ala, who was known for his lengthy standing, this was the way of the people of the past. Ibn al-Qayyim rahmatullahi ta'ala would come to lesson, and if the students saw that he began his prayer, Ibn al-Qayyim rahmatullahi ta'ala, do you know what they would do? If they noticed that before he began the prayer, began his lesson, he would begin a prayer, a voluntary prayer, what would they do? They knew that there was no dust today. They would leave, because they know that Ibn al-Qayyim rahmatullahi ta'ala would spend a significant time in the prayer. It's most likely there's not going to be any lesson today. This is the devotion that they had, along with the depth of knowledge that they possessed. Abu Muti' al-Balkhi rahimahullah, he said that any time of the day that I came to do tawaf, when he was in Mecca, so obviously Imam Abu Hanifah was based in Kufa, whenever he would come to Mecca, Abu Muti' al-Balkhi said, whenever I'd come to the haram, during the day or during the night time, he would find two people always doing tawaf. Sufyan al-Thawri and Abu Hanifah rahimahullah ta'ala. Whenever he would come, whatever time of the day, he would find these two individuals doing tawaf, meaning engaging in ibadah. This is something that it can't be done anywhere else except in the haram. In terms of his relationship with the Quran, how much Quran did he recite? They mention they approximate that he finished the Quran 7,000 times in his lifetime. 7,000 times in his lifetime, approximately. The point being, and hopefully this is just a few examples to emphasize the point, that they were also ubbad, my dear brothers and sisters. They were also worshippers of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, along with their knowledge. They didn't just confine themselves to theory, academia, but it also translated into knowledge, into action as well. Just a quick point regarding this section here. You might hear other things about Abu Hanifah rahmatullahi ta'ala and the people of the past, not just Abu Hanifah. About, for example, 40 years would go past and he would perform Salat al-Isha with the same wudu, Salat al-Fajr with the same wudu as he did with Salat al-Isha. Which means what? He didn't break his wudu and he was praying the entire night for 40 years. And so on. And there's other statements like that as well. It's important to remember that sometimes you might find in the books of history exaggeration. So it's true that he was an abid. These are simple examples that prove that point. But sometimes you find people, because of their love and devotion for a particular imam of theirs, they may mention statements which are a little bit of an exaggeration. Because when a person hears, for example, that, like for example, they say 70,000 Qur'ans he finished, you might feel a bit disheartened that you're never going to be able to reach that level. Or performing 40 years of the prayer, Fajr and Isha with the same wudu, you might think that's the best example to follow is whom? Is the example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And you'll find one thing about the Messenger alayhi salatu wasallam, that it's possible for any one of us to actually follow his sunnah. If you notice the people of the past, other than the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they might do things that it's not actually possible for you to emulate. But with the Messenger alayhi salatu wasallam, he lived a normal life that's possible for us to actually take as an example. So he's our ultimate role model. That's something important point to know. We mentioned last week, my dear brothers and sisters, that the A'immah, they went through struggles and difficulties. They were persecuted, all of the four Imams, including Abu Hanifah rahimahullah ta'ala. So he was based in Kufa, and the judge or the governor of Kufa at the time, by the name of Ibn Hubayra, he basically ordered Abu Hanifah to take up the position of judge in Kufa. Why is the position of a judge significant? Or why does the governor want him to become a judge? Because the governor can have influence on the decisions that he makes. So he ordered Abu Hanifah rahimahullah ta'ala to take up the position of judge in Kufa, but he refused. And due to his refusal, Ibn Hubayra ordered that he be flogged basically 110 times. 10 whips for 11 days. And he refused. He took the flogging. He didn't succumb to the order of the governor. And when they saw his determination, they just let him go. They realized that we're not going to actually be able to convince him otherwise. So he went through persecution. And remember, the reason why some of the governors were like this is because if you have an individual in a position which you've put them in, you may be able to pull some strings and have certain influence over decisions that they make. And the ulama, like Abu Hanifa, recognize this, that he's putting himself in a vulnerable situation, he needs to be careful. And that's why he refused. Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala, he was also persecuted, right? He was also flogged as well, due to a particular fitna that he went through. When he would recall this incident or this story of Imam Abu Hanifah rahimahullah ta'ala, he would actually cry. He would actually recall this story, and he would actually say that people need to make dua for Abu Hanifah rahimahullah ta'ala. He would make dua for Abu Hanifah rahimahullah ta'ala because of the difficulties and the struggle that he went through. These are some other reasons why some of the scholars you notice in the past would refuse to take up judicial posts. They saw themselves as insufficiently qualified. They didn't see themselves as qualified, or they were too busy with more important pursuits. They felt maybe not being a judge is better, so they can focus their energies on other pursuits. Like for example, one of my main teachers, he's also a judge in the Mahkamah in Medina. On multiple occasions he's tried to give his resignation, because you can tell that he's more inclined to focus on teaching and disseminating knowledge rather than this particular position. Or, for example, and then this is the case that you'll find was the case with Abu Hanifah rahimahullah and others, they were dissatisfied with the government and the policies of the government, and they didn't want to be a part of that system. But this is the persecution that Abu Hanifah rahimahullah went through, and we mentioned that challenges will come your way in different shapes and forms. As believers, we need to have patient perseverance and overcome these challenges. There's a statement that's mentioned by the scholars, بِالصَّبْرِ وَالْيَقِينِ تُنَالُ الْإِمَامَةُ فِي الدِّينِ. With patient perseverance and conviction in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's decree, a person will attain imama, spiritual leadership. And this is what happened with the Imams. We mentioned that early on in the adulthood of Imam Abu Hanifah, he was engaged in business. He would engage in business, and that continued later on in his life as well, along with his pursuit of knowledge. He was a silk merchant. One of his grandsons, Umar ibn Hamad, he mentions that Abu Hanifah was a silk merchant, and his shop was well renowned in the locality. So he was somebody who was wealthy. He had wealth, and he lived on the fruits of his own industry to support himself, his dependents, and also to support the needy. Remember, money, my dear brothers and sisters, is a tool that you can use to actually make investments in your next life. And this is exactly what Imam Abu Hanifah rahimahullah will do. At the end of the year, he would basically collect all of his profits. So he would engage in business, he would collect his profits, he'd obviously take care of himself, his dependents, and then what he would do, he would go to the scholars and the hadith specialists. Not just any scholars, he would go to the hadith specialists, and he would give them the surplus of the profits that he made. And he would say to them the following: spend it on your needs and praise none but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Take this money, spend it on whatever you need to spend it on, and praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I mean, don't praise me, don't give me thanks. I've given you nothing of my own wealth. What I've given you right now is not for my own wealth, is but the surplus that Allah Jalla wa Ala has graced me with to give to you. I mean, this is actually yours. You are deserving of this. Allah just used me as a means to deliver this wealth to you. It is the profit from your own merchandise. And he would give them. And if he would do this on a yearly basis. Not only that, he would have a concern for his students. You find a lot of the Tullab al-Ilm, they go through financial difficulties. So he would give each of his students a stipend, a certain amount of money as income basically, so they can dedicate themselves to seeking knowledge. So instead of having to focus on earning a livelihood and seeking knowledge, he said, look, I'm going to give you a stipend, you just focus your energies on seeking knowledge. One of his main students by the name of Abu Yusuf rahimahullah, he said that, I was from a very poor family. He was from the fuqara. Abu Hanifah rahimahullah supported me and my family for 10 years. He took care of all of our expenses. And then when I went to tell him that you're so generous, like 10 years you've been supporting me and my family, he goes, this is nothing, you haven't met my teacher Hamad. Meaning, where did he get this quality of being generous? He learned it from his teacher. Remember we said, you don't just learn knowledge and information from the teacher, you also learn these etiquettes and mannerisms and characteristics and attributes. He said, this is nothing. You haven't met my teacher Hamad. Meaning Hamad rahimahullah was on another level of generosity. So he was a person who would earn an honest livelihood and he would use the money that Allah Jalla wa Ala blessed him with to support himself, his dependents, and also the fuqara and the needy. And all of this is lesson for us. I'm not obviously mentioning them explicitly, but you can obviously derive your own points of benefit. He's known famously for being a faqih, a jurist. And some people criticize him about him not having much inayah or attention to prophetic traditions, hadith. He was known as a faqih. As we said early on in the lesson, Imam al-Shafi'i rahmatullahi says all of the people are indebted to Abu Hanifa for their legal knowledge. For their fiqh, they're all indebted to Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala. Shu'bah ibn Hajjaj, who was Shu'bah? No one knows who Shu'bah was. Have you guys heard of the term Amirul Mu'mineen? Have you heard Amirul Mu'mineen? The leader of the faithful? Who did they use that term in reference to normally? The Khalifa, the Caliph. They also use the term Amirul Mu'mineen in reference to a person who's reached the pinnacle of hadith expertise. So Shu'bah ibn Hajjaj was Amirul Mu'mineen fil hadith. You have to memorize like 100,000 hadith to even be worthy of getting that status. So Shu'bah rahimahullah ta'ala, who was a hadith expert, and not just any hadith expert, he was Amirul Mu'mineen fil hadith. He said people were asleep, metaphorically, until Abu Hanifa came and woke them up with his clear, penetrating and concise way of explaining things. There's a difference, my dear brothers and sisters, between a person who simply memorizes and regurgitates. That's one type of study. You memorize and you regurgitate. Medina University is built upon that, by the way. If you are able to memorize and regurgitate, you are a big sheikh. Is that true knowledge though? Not really. A person can memorize and regurgitate something they don't have no understanding of. There were people in Medina, and you come, not just in Medina, but you find people that will memorize, for example, 1,000 lines of poetry in Arabic grammar, but they can't apply the Arabic grammar on a basic sentence. So they're able to memorize and regurgitate 1,000 lines of poetry, but they're unable to apply that knowledge. So memorizing something doesn't necessarily make you a person proficient in knowledge. Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, even though he may not have had access to a lot of hadith, he had depth of knowledge or depth of understanding. Imam al-Dhahabi rahimahullah ta'ala, he says when it comes to juristic knowledge, the precise application of reason and a nuanced understanding of matters, Abu Hanifa was as good as one could get. Meaning there's nobody above him. There was nobody above Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala during his era in terms of the understanding and the ability to really highlight the underpinnings of the Sharia. A lot of the great fuqaha of contemporary times are not those who just memorize hadith and they can regurgitate them. You find that a lot of these guys who are like the experts in fiqh right now, they might not memorize lots of hadith, but you find that they have penetrating insight and understanding of those hadith. So what was Imam Abu Hanifa's legal understanding and his madhab based upon? What was it based upon? Like we said, people critique him and say that he wasn't really strong in hadith. And it's true. Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala was not a hadith expert as such. Like Imam Ahmad rahimahullah ta'ala was known for his hadith. Shu'bah al-Hajjaj, muhaddith. Ali ibn al-Madini. These are guys of expertise, their specialization in hadith. Imam Abu Hanifa's specialization wasn't hadith. And he lived in Kufa. The problem or the issue or the challenge in Kufa at the time was what? What was the challenge in Kufa at the time when Imam Abu Hanifa was living? Say that again? Shia. Exactly. It was a melting point. It was a melting, what's the word? Melting pot of loads of different types of people from different sects, different backgrounds. So he had to be extra cautious in terms of accepting narrations. Aywa? That's right. So the difficulty was for him, he can have hadith, but that hadith might be fabricated. He might be weak. So he was very cautious in terms of the number of narrations that he accepted. So he was limited in that regard compared to other scholars. But what did he base his understanding upon? Did he just make stuff up? What was his legal theory? This entire madhab, what was it based upon? This fiqh, what was it based upon? What are the principles that governed his understanding and his fiqh? he actually explains. He explains, exactly. He says himself, he explains to Sufyan al-Thawri, rahimahullah ta'ala, or one of the scholars, can't remember exactly whom, but he explains that this is my methodology. He says the following: when it comes to understanding the religion, I take what I find in Allah's book. His primary source of knowledge is the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We mentioned he finished approximately 7,000 khatamat or khatams of the Quran in his lifetime. Meaning, all of the Imam, they were extremely devoted to the Quran. He goes, if I do not find anything there, meaning if there's an issue that we're looking into and we can't find the answer in the Quran explicitly, then I refer to the Sunnah of His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And remember, we mentioned that Imam, they agree on these two sources of knowledge. All of them. All of the Muslims, not just the Imam, all of the Muslims agree that these are the two sources of knowledge. So I can't find something in the Quran, I need to refer to the Sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says, otherwise, if I can't find something in the Sunnah explicitly or implicitly, then I turn to the opinions of the companions. There may be a mas'ala, legal issue, that is not being mentioned explicitly in the Sunnah. So I look at the opinions of the companions radiallahu anhum. I adopt from those opinions what I wish, and I leave aside what I wish, but I do not depart from them altogether. Anyone know what this last phrase means? I adopt from those opinions what I wish and leave aside what I wish, but I do not depart from them altogether. He considers everything. If the Sahaba, amongst the Sahaba, there's three different opinions, meaning the Sahaba was split into three groups and they had three opinions, he would choose one of those three opinions. He wouldn't come with a fourth opinion. If there's opinions amongst the companions, he would pick one of the opinions. He wouldn't come with a third. What if there are no opinions of the companions radiallahu anhum? What if the companions were undecided on the matter? He said, rahimahullah, if I find nothing, or if I have the opinions of the tabi'un, meaning the students of the companions, if I don't have any opinions from the companions, but I have opinions from the students, he would say, then they are men like us. They exercise their best judgment, and I likewise do the same. What does that mean? And he feels that he's as qualified as the other tabi'un, because he is from the tabi'un, isn't it? We mentioned that he met Anas ibn Malik. He was from that tabaqa. So he goes, if there's nothing amongst the companions, then I exercise my best judgment based upon the qualification that I possess, just like the rest of the tabi'un do. What's the important thing to note here, my dear brothers and sisters? That his primary sources of the religion is the Quran and then the Sunnah of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And if there's nothing there, explicitly or implicitly, then he will refer to the companions radiallahu anhum, the direct students of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So his madhab is as valid of a madhab just like all of the other madahib that we have. There is no weakness in it. In fact, in terms of juristic understanding, maybe Imam Abu Hanifa's madhab is probably the strongest. Because when you're limited for textual evidences, you have to apply analytical reasoning, qiyas. You have to have original thinking. So you find that Imam Abu Hanifa's madhab, they focus a lot on this. In terms of what are the underpinnings of, there's a textual evidence, but what is the Sharia actually getting at? We can read the literal meaning, but what's the underpinning? What are the principles that govern this hadith or this ayah of the Quran? Finally, my dear brothers and sisters, to finish off, Imam Abu Hanifa was a person who possessed a virtuous tongue. Abu Hanifa, Abdullah ibn Mubarak, he mentions to Sufyan al-Thawri, he said, Abu Hanifa never backbites anyone. I never heard him say anything bad. I never heard him say anything bad about his opponents. So Sufyan replies and he says, he's far too sensible to subject his virtuous deeds to that which would cancel them out. Meaning, if you backbite somebody, all of the good deeds that you've done, what's going to happen? It's going to be distributed. The hasanat are going to be taken from you. So he goes that he would never speak ill of somebody, even though people would harm him. Even though people would harm him, he would ensure that he wouldn't speak in a foul way or use foul language or anything of that sort. He would always be virtuous. He said in a gathering one time, he goes that all the people that opposed me and harmed me, I was never concerned about getting back at them. I was more concerned about them being punished and being subjected to punishment and attaining the wrath of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he declares, he goes, I forgive every single person that ever harmed me or did anything bad towards me. Why? Because he's concerned about that person not being punished by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He passed away rahimahullah ta'ala in the year 150 after Hijrah, and he was about 70 years old when he passed away. They mentioned that they had to perform Salat al-Janazah 6 times in order to accommodate the number of people, the crowd that came to attend his Janazah. So they repeated the Salat of the Janazah Salah, the funeral prayer 6 times to accommodate the number of people that came to perform the funeral prayer on him rahimahullah ta'ala. With that, my dear brothers and sisters, just a couple of summary points that I've kind of extrapolated from the slides that we just went through. Number 1, never belittle a goodly word. If you've got something good to say, say it. You don't know how impactful that may be for a person. Just like a Sha'bi said to him, don't neglect the scholars, sit with them, because I see you to be somebody alert, somebody who's got a strong mind, potential. This was the spark that made him change. Number 2, students require a mentor. If you're going to be seeking knowledge, my dear brothers and sisters, you need to ensure you spend a significant amount of time with one particular shaykh before you start branching to others. And you should always have somebody who acts as a mentor. What's the difference between a teacher and a mentor? I suppose, you could say it's probably kind of like the same thing. Or like a shaykh, a traditional teacher and a mentor. What would the difference be?
Learn from the teacher, but you get support from
Ahsan, I think that's a nice way to coin it. You learn from a teacher, but from a mentor you get support, you get advice, you get direction. You learn from him, spending time with him in person. And that's extremely important. All of the Imam they all had a main teacher of this. Imam Abu Hanifah al-Hammad, we'll talk about Imam Malik and his main teacher, Imam Shafi'i, the same thing. They all had one particular shaykh that they spent a significant time with before they branched out to others. Number 3, nothing complements knowledge like kindness. The Imam Abu Hanifah, he possessed knowledge, but his demeanor, the way he would interact with others, was extremely beautiful because he adorned himself with good character. Number 4, knowledge should lead to spiritual exertion, meaning knowledge shouldn't just be an academic pursuit, but it should be transformative. You actually become a better person and you engage in ibadah, in worship. The more knowledge the person gains, the more worship they should increase in. And finally, whenever you're studying, my dear brothers and sisters, try to understand the theoretical underpinning of textual evidence. For example, the Prophet ﷺ talks about a dog that licks a vessel of water, for example. How many times do you have to wash it? 7 times, once with turab, once with dirt or soil. What's the theoretical, what's the underpinning behind this hadith? Sorry? What is the Prophet ﷺ trying to emphasize here with this hukum? The najasa, there's najasa, and also what do we need to do with the najasa? We need to ensure that it's cleansed properly. Wash it 7 times, once with dirt. Can we use, instead of washing it 7 times using dirt or soil, instead can we just use soap or a different type of substitute? Would that be valid? Even though the hadith says you have to use dirt. Those who have a very literal understanding, they would say you have to use dirt because the Prophet ﷺ said dirt. Those who said, okay, the Messenger ﷺ mentioned this, but what is the goal behind this hadith? Is cleanliness, to ensure that that particular thing has been cleansed efficiently. If you can clean it using other substitute methods, then that takes its place and it's valid.
I think we have tested, but with it, it's getting more clean. They have used a lot of, I have read some.
Yeah.
Tested. With it, it's 99. The other chemicals still there.
Yeah. So the point being is that the level of cleanliness needs to be there. And this applies to the entire Sharia. Sharia has underpinnings. And we went through a class in the masjid on Qawaid Fiqhiyya, if you remember, on the, what do we title it as? The Sharia Encapsulated. That was the title of the series that we done. We went through 5 major principles of the Sharia. These principles are derived from these individual ahadith and ayat of the Quran. Meaning it's distilled from the nusus. And they mentioned that these 5 are the major principles that govern the Sharia. So try to understand and really pay attention to that. And that's what will develop a person's aptitude in fiqh. طيب, with that, my dear brothers, alhamdulillah, we'll come to the end of today's lesson. Before we finish, does anyone have any questions or any thoughts that they would like to share? As Brother Salman. Yep. No. He wouldn't necessarily come up with his own opinion, but he would apply his own judgment to decide. So it could be an opinion that... Yeah, exactly. But if he did come with another opinion, he wouldn't see that as something blameworthy. Because, yeah, he would or wouldn't, exactly. He might come up with an opinion, a conclusion that some of the other tabi'un held, or he might come with a conclusion that nobody held. Yeah, conclusion that some of the other tabi'un held, or he might come with a conclusion that nobody held. Yeah. It's only at that point, exactly. When it comes to the companions, though, he would pick from one of the opinions of the companions. Ishakil. Where do you start? You start with the Quran. As in, you have to see what's available to you in your locality. If there's nothing available in your locality, then there are some online resources that you could also tap into as well. I know maybe it's not too helpful, but yeah, you find what's available in your locality. If you can get in touch with a teacher, then they can give you more specific advice depending on your circumstance. Yeah. Any other questions? So these are like the action points. These 6 points here from the life of, or these 5 points from the life of Abu Hanifah. Jazakumullah khairan, my dear brothers and sisters. We'll continue next week, inshallah, same time, with the next Imam Malik ibn Anas, rahimahullah. Wallahu alam, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.